Yo, what's up? This is Jay Dennis, and we're back with another Ranked and Reviewed. And I guess I'm going to do that every time it involves like a guttural vocalist. Because today we are doing one of my favorite death metal, deathcore, whatever you want to call it, groove metal, death metalcore bands, Whitechapel, who have just recently released their 8th album, Kin. And this is a band that I've been listening to since 2008, since their second album had been relevant at the time, and been largely listening to them ever since. So we're going back all the way to 2007 with their first album, the Somatic Defilement, all the way up to their most recent album, number 8, Kin, and everything in between. The reason why Whitechapel is so special to me is because, well, maybe outside of Black Dahlia Murder, this will probably be the heaviest band that I've done on this Ranked and Reviewed series thus far, depending on what your interpretation of heavy is. But to me, it's low guitar tunings, powerful, harsh vocals. Generally, there's some speed or some groove behind it. And Whitechapel just kind of does everything with regards to the heavy. And they're just a band that I just thoroughly enjoy and respect. And I enjoy all 8 of their albums. So once again, not an easy band to do. But I did come out with a ranking, which will be a bit different than probably other ones you've seen. But I have seen them live. I think every musician in the band is incredible. I think Phil Bozeman is one of the absolute best metal vocalists of all time. He's probably in my top 5 favorite. If I were to just aggregate all the vocalists I like across different genres, like Jacoby Shaddix, Sam Carter, fucking Chester Bennington, Jonathan Davis, Fred Durst, Johnny Davey, just across different genres of metal, and even like hard rock or whatever. But I'd probably put Phil Bozeman in my top 5. I've seen them live; they were incredible. Also, top 5 live bands I've ever seen. They sounded just as incredible live as they did on the studio releases. And yeah, man, I got some sentimental value to some of their albums, like most bands I've done so far, and I've just been enjoying all of their releases. So I'm going to go through, rank each of these, and then at the top or at the bottom, towards the end of the video, I'm going to give you my top 10 favorite tracks. So be sure to comment what you agree or disagree with, what would you do differently, and what are your favorite tracks or memories of Whitechapel. How do you like the new album? So let's get into it. At the number... Oh, real quick. Since this was a hard band to rank, out of their 8 albums, I was probably very familiar with maybe 5 of them, and then a few of them I needed to give a couple of re-listens, but I'm largely familiar with this band. But there were 3 ties on here. So aside from the best album to the worst album, there's not a huge gap in quality, in my opinion, between a lot of these albums. The spread is the worst album got an 8.3 out of 10, which is pretty good. And then my favorite album got a 8.9. So 0.6 spread between my least favorite and most favorite. So we're starting with a 2-way tie at the bottom here, but I'm going to give the slight disadvantage to the number 8 spot, which is Mark of the Blade, which is an album that I see other people typically put at the bottom. Now look, the only reason I put this one at the bottom was because I had to put something at the bottom. I actually enjoy this album, could feasibly listen to it, pretty much all their albums, including this one, from front to back, pretty comfortably. There's other ranked and reviews I've done recently where I'd say the bottom album or one of the bottom albums I've said that I'd probably never listen to this album again from start to finish. That is not true of any Whitechapel album. I could listen to any of their albums and be happy with them. Mark of the Blade, I have zero issues with the fact that this is the album where they premiered Phil Bozeman's clean vocals, which I thoroughly enjoy. It has nothing to do with that. it's just, this album is just kind of the most, I guess you would say, not recycled, but just aside from introducing a melodic sound, it just isn't a groundbreaking album otherwise. There is some thrash, some of the groove riffs, which is, they started bringing some more groove metal elements at this point already. It just wasn't as groundbreaking. The only thing groundbreaking they did with this album was they introduced clean vocals, which they did great with the songs Bring Me Home, and then I believe it was Decennium, the closing track. Some of the thrashier songs, like Venomous, and then I believe the opening track, The Void, are probably my favorite tracks. I think the instrumental Brotherhood is also great. I love the dissonant riffs in songs like Dwell in the Shadows. And again, I find the clean vocals and the melodies in songs like Bring Me Home to be awesome, but the middle of the album just kind of gets a little bit boring. Tremors, Killing Industry, Tormented, nothing really special there. But The Void and Mark of the Blade are pretty solid opening tracks to kind of get the album on a solid note. But I only put this album at the bottom because, 6 albums deep, for them to not really be breaking a whole lot of new ground and not put out their best material on this one is why it sits at the bottom spot. But it is tied essentially with the number 7 spot, but I'm going to give the number 7 spot the slight edge. Sorry it fell this low, but it's their first album, The Somatic Defilement, which again, another raw first release from a heavy-ass band, but I would say Somatic Defilement is probably one of the better first albums I've heard from other bands of this genre. A lot of other deathcore bands of the mid to late 2000s, they put out their first raw release or whatever on MySpace, and it just sounds kind of generic and boring, and the production's not that great. Somatic Defilement, whether it's the original version or the remixed, remastered version, it's a fun album. I love it. Even though it's Phil Bozeman in his most infancy stage of his vocals, they still sound great. I did listen to this album quite a bit when I was a senior in high school, and I was also listening, of course, to This Is Exile. Those albums in Whitechapel were basically one of my first exposures. They were the gateway band to get me into the deathcore genre. Believe it or not, as much as I've always been a metalhead, I've not always been a huge fan of incredibly harsh vocals. Like, I could handle metalcore, like As I Lay Dying or Killswitch Engage, but when we got to the deathcore stuff like Suicide Silence and more extreme stuff, that's when I was like, I can't do this. But over time it did grow on me, and now there's really no music that's too heavy for me. I mean, there's certain genres I'm not a huge fan of, but it has nothing to do with the aggression. It's more about the substance of the music. But anyway, Somatic Defilement is a great first release, and the reason I gave it the slight edge over Mark of the Blade was because it's the first release. That early in their career, them putting out a good quality album like this makes it a little bit better in my opinion. Somatic Defilement's pretty cool. The title track, the outro is really cool. I've always enjoyed that, symphonic string selection. The Last Minute of Chaos and songs like Prosthetic Fluid Asphyxiation. My 2 favorite songs on the album are in the middle, Fairy Fae, with those pinch harmonic riffs, and then Ear to Ear, which is like one of their heaviest songs. I love that last minute of Ear to Ear also, and that random-ass breakdown that just kind of fades in. I like that it's followed up with Alone in the Morgue, which is a really creepy song, creepy title, and I enjoy it. Somatic Defilement is just a solid album from front to back. It just doesn't have anything that breaks the excellent range, and that's why it sits towards the bottom, and I think it's their shortest album. But it is a great first release. It opens and closes on a dark note with that serial killer, was it Jeffrey Dahmer? I forget. Quote in the beginning, and then the ending of Articulo Mortis and that melodic bridge. It's dark, it's heavy, it's just the vocals aren't as developed as they would be later on, but it is a solid album, and I'd highly recommend listening to it. Number 7 spot, their first release, Somatic Defilement. At the number 7 spot, at the number 6 spot, we have Our Endless War, their 5th album from 2014. This one I would have thought would have been at the bottom, but I listened to it a few more times, and I actually think it's got a couple of high points that elevated a little bit higher than Somatic Defilement. This is like kind of one of their most misunderstood albums, I guess, or some people would maybe call it very underrated. I'd agree with them, not to the point though where I'd put it super high, but it's by no means their weakest album. It's a little inconsistent. It kind of goes back and forth between a high quality track like Mono to a low quality track like Let Me Burn, up again to a high quality track like Worship the Digital Age, down to a low quality track like How Times Have Changed. So it's a bit of an inconsistent album, but it's got enough high points to where it brings it above the bottom two spots with songs like Mono, one of my favorite songs, Blacked Out. I love the thrashiness of this album. Endless War is where they didn't introduce it. I would say Self-Titled's where they really started to introduce it, like more so. But our Endless War is where more of, I guess, the groove metal elements started to come in. Mostly low vocals. You're starting to get away from the high vocals. That's another reason why I like Somatic Defilement. It's got a perfect mix of highs and lows. Over time, Phil Bozeman starts to phase out his high vocals, unfortunately. I love his highs, but he's mostly known for his lows, I guess. Our Endless War, though, it's got solid singles. It's got great songs like Mono and Blacked Out. And it's got great melodic sections where the guitar compositions and parts all really complement each other really well. You got memorable choruses and songs like Our Endless War and then like The Saw is the Law. But it's definitely tracks like Mono, which sound kind of Slipknot-ish in my opinion, and then Blacked Out, which is just a freaking assault on the senses and just really like death metal, deathcore bliss. Great guitar solo also. Blacked Out's definitely the best song on the album. I've always enjoyed that one. When this album did come out in 2014, I listened to it a few times, but I was a little put off by the new logo, and I thought they kind of took a little bit of a step back with this compared to their self-titled release. But in hindsight, it does grow on you after a couple listens, and I can see why people really enjoy this one. And moving on to the number 5, we actually have a 3-way tie between these next 3 entries, but I'm going to give the number 5 spot to their self-titled album, Whitechapel, album number 4 that came out in 2012. When it came out, I did buy it on iTunes, and I was actually pretty familiar with it. Much like Our Endless War, it's got a couple of high points and then a little bit of a little back and forth blah action in the middle of the album. But considering more of the high points on here and just how much better this album sat where it was in its place and time, I'm giving the edge to their self-titled album. I see why a lot of people like this one a lot, or they put it higher up. It comes out swinging with Make It Bleed. Hate Creation, another heavy, awesome track. And then that's just like that fucking part where it sounds like you should be like jumping. Like, it's such a great live song. And then best track on the album, of course, is Culturalist. Another heavy ass. When Whitechapel goes fast, in my opinion, that's when they're at their best. Like, they can do the groove metal thing and be cool, but when you're playing just like low end drop G riffs, it's hard to sound original, in my opinion. That's why I like the faster stuff, because you can kind of have a little bit more fun. And even though it's probably technically harder to play, Phil's vocals just sound insane with it. So that's why Hate Creation and Culturalist are definitely the best songs. The instrumental, Devoid, the piano on that's incredible, which leads into some awesome heavy instrumentation work as well. The album is bookended with the same piano riff, which kind of brings it all together. But where the self-titled album suffers a little bit is the middle. I Dementia, Section 8, and Faces are all kind of not weak tracks, but weak relative to the strength that Whitechapel puts out with some of their better songs, in my opinion. It just, middle of the album kind of sounds like it blends together, but it does open on a strong note and kind of closes on a strong note also. It's marginally better than Our Endless War because there's enough high points to keep it up, and the low points aren't as low as the low points on Our Endless War. So number 5 is Whitechapel. Got a little bit of sentimental value to that one. I used to lift a lot of weights to that back in the day. But now let's move on to the next part of our 3-way tie, which I'm giving the slight edge to The number 4 spot, if that makes sense. Sorry if it sounds confusing. Their newest album, Kin, which, damn, solid album, man. Very consistent. Nothing that I dislike about it. It's just it doesn't have anything that breaks the excellent range for me. But it's far more consistent than Whitechapel or Our Endless War. Kin is a continuation, I guess, of The Valley, where this whole exploration into the more melodic side, more of Phil Bozeman's clean vocals are more on display here. And it just sounds incredible. Kin just sounds like a very mature, powerful album. Outside of the fact that Phil Bozeman is an incredible vocalist, he's also an insanely good lyricist. The man's clearly been through a lot in his life, to say the least, and his ability to project and to emote and express, not just in the lyrics and in the vocal performance, but also in the music videos too. There's a lot of art behind what Whitechapel does, and that's clearly demonstrated in an album like Kin. The heaviness of Whitechapel is by no means lost on an album like Kin. You got what sounds almost like a deathcore sounding intro in like Without Us, which is followed up with a really beautiful brief instrumental of Without You. But I'd say out of 11 tracks, or 12 tracks, I don't know, maybe about a third of them are like almost all clean vocals. You got, I think, Anticure, Orphan, Kin. If I'm missing one, don't yell at me. But you got far more clean vocals on this album, but they sound great. But the heaviness is definitely there in songs, I believe, like History is Silent or Blood-Soaked Symphony is very chuggy, very heavy. I Will Find You is also pretty damn heavy at some parts, as well as Lost Boy. Great singles. I think the first 3 tracks were all singles. But anyway, Kin, I just enjoyed listening to it a lot. It's very solid from front to back. It doesn't actually have any of my top 10 favorite Whitechapel songs, but as a whole performance, the album does do very solid. And 8 albums deep, for them to put out albums of this caliber, whilst covering a bunch of different genres and ideas while remaining fluid and while remaining in the identity that Whitechapel possesses, is very impressive. I've never seen a band go this far off the beaten path of what they normally do and have such a solid response from the fans. I've seen a couple people put Kin towards the bottom of their rankings. Maybe it's just they either don't appreciate or understand what they're doing. I get music's subjective, but I think I'm largely seeing no backlash. I'm seeing largely support. Like, oh my God, Whitechapel is like going into Opeth territory, or they're like progressive death metal now. Anyway, great job, Whitechapel, on your newest release. I think 8 albums deep, Kin is the 4th best album. That's my opinion. And to finish off this 3-way tie, I'm going to give the edge to the number 3 album, which is the sophomore success. This is Exile. Anyway, yeah, man, This Is Exile. This is the album that got me into Whitechapel. I listened to it the year it came out. I listened to it even more the following year, 2009, my senior year of high school. I've had Eternal Refuge and Exalt as MySpace songs at one point. This is just beautifully refined peak deathcore right here. It took everything they did in Somatic Defilement and they built on it. Everything got better. They added more melodic guitar work, more lead guitar work, which made the album just more impressive. The dynamics between the breakdowns, the heavy, the highs, and the low vocals, like everything just sounds incredible on this album. You got 2 instrumentals, Death Becomes Him and Of Legions, which are both awesome, especially Of Legions. I love the electronics that they put in songs like Of Legions or during the bridge of Messiahbolical. It just sounds incredible what they put in this album. A lot of depth, a lot of not just jun, 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 da, 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 you know, there's that was Bring Me the Horizon I was referencing, but there's just a lot of depth to this as a deathcore album. To me, I would call it nearly perfect as a deathcore album. You got solid guitar solos and Father of Lies and To All That Are Dead. It's just, deathcore can be a little bit boring if all you do is rely on the chugs and the gutturals. But if you had some solid depth, guitar works, tremolo picking, double bass, some good highs, maybe some pig squeals. It sounds pretty solid. Best tracks on this album, in my opinion, are Exalt, Damon the Procreated, Eternal Refuge, and of course the closing track, Messiahbolical, that 6-7 minute masterpiece with one of the best breakdowns, in my opinion. But the singles, This Is Exile and Possession, both excellent singles, cool music videos to complement them. So This Is Exile aged really well. It was definitely trendy back in the mid to late 2000s to do like deathcore, MySpace, Suicide Silence, shit like that. But this was definitely like Whitechapel in the pocket, really fucking killing it. And I could definitely see why this is the album that put them on the map. And they have not taken advantage of their standing in the metal community by any means. So now as we get to the top two, which my top two are also a two-way tie, we're getting into an interesting dynamic here. So I love these top two albums right here, but I'm going to give the slight disadvantage to their 2019 release, The Valley. Number 2 spot goes to their 7th album, The Valley, which is kind of, I guess, part 1 of the 2-part series of their last 2 albums. If Ken was the most recent work, then The Valley, of course, is what was before it. I just wasted like 20 seconds rambling there. Anyway, The Valley, man. Pretty much near perfect. Great comeback after Mark of the Blade. They really honed in on what they introduced in Mark of the Blade with like the more melodic side, but they like doubled down on the heavy, the groove metal in songs like Brimstone and I believe Black Bear. The groove on songs like that, the riffs sound a lot more original. They sound a lot tighter. They sound more fun. But then you got plenty of thrash, plenty of heavy in songs like Forgiveness is a Weakness, The Other Side, which is the best song on the album. You got great singles in When a Demon Defiles a Witch. Beautiful introduction of what was to come from Whitechapel with regards to writing complex but smooth songs that have many layers. I watched a couple friends of mine do a reaction video to When a Demon Defiles a Witch, and you're just seeing just this assault on the senses of heavy music, but then in the middle, you hear Phil's beautiful, clean vocals with great guitar work, and you're just like, oh shit, this song has layers to it. And then Hickory Creek, another awesome song featuring all clean vocals. And then I believe, same thing with Doomwoods, but Lovelace is also a great heavy track. I just think that this song is Phil Bozeman in his absolute vocal peak. I think over time, as the albums progress from start to finish, from Somatic Defilement all the way up to Ken, his vocals just get better with every album. But I think The Valley just kind of has his best vocal work, in my opinion. His heavy stuff sounds like it's beyond refined. It just sounds perfect. And then, of course, his clean vocals sound even better. Wow, excuse me. Much like Ken, it's a very consistent album with no weak tracks, but there's just more peaks. You got Demon Defiles a Witch and The Other Side, which are just highly rated songs, and then Lovelace, Hickory Creek, Brimstone, Forgiveness is a Weakness, all getting marks above an 8.8 or higher. Just a insanely good, beautiful album. I can see why most people put this one towards the top, because The Valley is near peak Whitechapel. But honestly, dude, my favorite album from them at the number 1 spot absolutely has to be their 3rd album, A New Era of Corruption, from 2010, which you might say, well, Jay, you're doing another summer of 2010 release. That was like the best summer, one of the best summers of your life. Isn't any album from that year automatically going to be the top of any artist's discography? No. Didn't happen with As I Lay Dying. It didn't happen with Bullet for My Valentine. But it did happen with Whitechapel. I think A New Era of Corruption has the absolute best guitar work. And it's the perfect culmination. The only thing this album doesn't have is the melodic vocals of Whitechapel. So I can't say New Era of Corruption is the perfect mix of all the Whitechapel sounds. I'd probably say that that's The Valley. But because even though I love Phil's clean vocals, the guy sounds like he sounds. I'm getting hints of like Maynard from Tool or Corey Taylor from Slipknot, people saying like he sounds like a mix between all that. Yeah, the guy sounds fucking incredible and he should be proud of himself. But I just always tend to lean towards the heavier stuff. It depends on the genre though. Like, obviously I like certain genres that they have more clean vocals, but for Whitechapel, I think just my absolute favorite is A New Era of Corruption, which I believe is probably their heaviest album. But it's got that sophisticated level of songwriting that's heavily rhythmic, but also layered with good guitar lead work and melodies. And it just sounds unique. It just sounds evil. It sounds like the album's, by the way, I can't believe I'm this far in without saying it. Whitechapel's got fucking incredible artwork for pretty much all their albums. But this one's probably my favorite cover. New Era of Corruption with that album artwork, it sounds exactly the way the album artwork looks. It just sounds like, it sounds industrial. It sounds mechanical. It sounds evil when you hear harmonic scrapes and riffs like Murder Sermon. I fucking love that intro. I would say that this is definitely the album where they start to not introduce, but I'd say maybe tease the groovier side whilst maintaining the thrashier, heavier deathcore sound that they had pretty much perfected in This Is Exile. New Era of Corruption is kind of the perfect median between This Is Exile and then maybe Self-Titled and Beyond, whilst maintaining its own identity. This album just kind of has most of my favorite songs from them. You got Reprogrammed to Hate. You got Single File to Dehumanization, which, if you thought Messiahbolical was a powerful closing track, I think Single File to Dehumanization with that disgusting 8-string dun-dun, dun-dun, bow. Like, just, it's the heaviest song. It's the heaviest song they have. It's very consistent, and it's just got enough of my favorite tracks on here to go like, yeah, this is definitely their best album. You got great lead guitar work in songs like Breeding Violence, which sounds like a fucking like Crash Bandicoot running through like a pyramid Egyptian level. You got the heavy ass groove of Darkest Day of Man. You got great lead work in songs like Devolver, Unnerving, Prayer of Mockery, heavy, catchy, thrashy, groovy riffs, necromechanical, Into Flesh, like, and let's not even forget about the amazing features on this album. You got Chino Moreno of Deftones in the bridge of Reprogrammed to Hate, which just adds so much to the song. You got Vincent, whatever his last name is, from the Acacia Strain in Murder Sermon, whose vocals fit perfectly with Phil's, honestly. New Era of Corruption is just the best. They introduced a couple of lower tunings here. The first two albums they were primarily playing in drop A, but I believe they brought in 8 strings for part of this album, and they did like either double drop E or I think it was drop E. And songs like Single File to Dehumanization. I'm trying to remember if they played 8 string on any other tracks. And of course they brought in drop G for Breeding Violence and maybe a few other songs. Largely still in drop A though, which I love. Anyway, New Era of Corruption, in my opinion, is their best album, hands down. Marginally better than The Valley, but just that preference towards that heavy industrial, slightly more tight. Like, I'm all for Whitechapel being experimental and doing a bunch of different things on an album and still sounding cohesive, but I just kind of feel like they were more dialed into a particular sound and to a particular era. And for album number 3, that's extremely impressive, and I think that's why I gave this the top spot pretty easily. So let's recap from least favorite to most favorite. All albums that I still enjoy, though. We got Mark of the Blade, The Somatic Defilement, Our Endless War, Self-Titled, Kin, This Is Exile, The Valley, and then their best album is A New Era of Corruption. My top 10 tracks, which a few of them might be a little bit fluid, some of them might work their way in and out, but they're mostly Forgiveness Is a Weakness, Murder Sermon, Damon the Procreated, Messiahbolical, Hate Creation, The Other Side, Blacked Out, Single File to Dehumanization, Culturalist, and my favorite track, Reprogrammed to Hate. There were 3 off of Corruption, 2 off of Self-Titled, 1 off of Our Endless War, 2 off of Exile, and 2 off of Valley. So only 3 albums, unfortunately, didn't get a favorite track. That's usually how it works. So I want to thank you guys for listening to me talk about Whitechapel and their 8 albums. What do you guys think of Kin? Do you think that Whitechapel's at their peak right now? I personally do. I think Whitechapel's like, I think if they were to do like a perfect circle, they put out these two beautiful albums, The Valley and Kin, but I think a perfect circle would be they just put out a straight heavy album like This Is Exile or New Era of Corruption again. If they don't, that's fine. They got an insanely good legacy, but at least for me personally, as a fan, especially a fan of the heavier stuff, just in general, to me that would be a perfect circle, is that they came back and did like another deathcore album or something, just like a nod to the fans, or they feel like that's right. They got insanely good guitar players that play great rhythm and lead sections. I think it's Ben. Ben's the one that plays the leads, and he sounds really fucking good. And their drumming is insane. I think the drummer's the only one where they've had multiple drummers, but they've largely remained consistent with their lineup. But anyway, Phil and the boys, you guys are incredible musicians. Thank you for creating an insanely heavy and incredible legacy of music. I hope you keep going. Thank you for gifting us with incredibly mature, beautiful music. You've done insanely good work with your last couple of releases. And thank you for making metal relevant again with even some of the heavier stuff from the mid to late 2000s. So comment, subscribe, let me know what you guys agree or don't agree with. What are your favorite songs? What are your favorite albums? How would you rank them differently? Why do you like or not like certain albums? Let me know. And be sure to check out the other ranked and reviewed videos as well. I've done other metal bands of all sorts of subgenres. I'll be doing more deathcore soon. I've got Suicide Silence and a few others on the docket. But in the meantime, stay metal. I don't know why I'm closing the videos with that. Just have a good Thanksgiving. Bye.